Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Lance Corporal Vera Kaczynski sat at the far end, her uniform pressed, her rifle bag slung neatly against the wall. No one made eye contact. Not the staff sergeant who ran the range. Not the corporal who smirked when he noticed her name patch. Not the Marines who chuckled in low voices like she wasn't even in the room. She was there, but not really there. She'd seen that look before. The look that said, "You don't belong here. You're an accident in the system, a box checked by some officer who never even met you." The clock ticked toward qualification time. Her hands were still, folded on the table, but her jaw tightened. Staff Sergeant Derek Morrison, the man with the authority today, leaned his broad frame against the whiteboard. His voice was loud, too loud, like every word carried the weight of law. "All designated shooters will report to the firing line with their assigned rifles and issued ammunition," he barked. Then his tone shifted, just slightly, when his eyes cut toward her. "Support personnel may observe from the tower." A couple Marines snickered under their breath. Morrison didn't call for silence. He let it ride. Vera didn't answer, didn't move, didn't rise to the bait. But inside, she could feel the old fire ignite, the same one that burned when she was 12 years old in her grandfather's Montana workshop, hearing the same doubt from neighbors who thought a little girl had no business touching powder and brass. They hadn't known what she knew. And neither did Morrison. She pushed back her chair and walked out, boots striking the floor with steady rhythm. Calm, controlled, silent, but there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. The morning air outside was thick with coastal fog. Camp Pendleton's hills rose like faded ghosts beyond the range. She drew in a long breath, letting the salt air settle her heartbeat. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Precision isn't power, Vera. Precision is patience. It's dignity. And dignity doesn't argue, it proves." At the armory that morning, Morrison had smiled when he denied her request for match-grade ammunition. Smiled like he was doing her a favor by giving her standard ball rounds instead, the kind that scattered groups like buckshot past 300 meters. He called it the regulation issue. But they both knew it was a game. His corporal laughed, suggesting maybe she could help collect brass afterward. She had nodded once, accepted the box, and walked away. But deep inside, a quiet promise took shape. They thought she had nothing, but she had everything she needed. Locked in the back of her vehicle, hidden inside a container she'd brought from Quantico, rested 40 hand-loaded cartridges. Her own work, each case trimmed and polished, each primer seated with care, each bullet measured to the thousandth of an inch. Ammunition she had built for moments like this, not for show, not for bragging rights, but for survival. She had learned young. The system failed people who didn't fit the mold, and she never fit the mold. Now, with less than 2 hours until Colonel Mitchell arrived to watch the qualification, Vera had a choice. Fade into the background like Morrison wanted, or step forward, loaded with her grandfather's lessons and her own defiance. She placed the container on the hood of her truck and opened it. The brass gleamed in the weak sunlight, lined in neat rows like a soldier's formation. Each round was a memory of summer days spent in her grandfather's shop in Whitefish, Montana. The smell of old wood, the rasp of a file against steel, the way he would set her small hands on a press handle and say, "Consistency, Vera. You win not with strength but with the refusal to cut corners." Her chest tightened at the thought. He died while she was still in boot camp. She had missed his funeral, trading grief for a rifle qualification where she'd shot expert on her very first attempt. It hadn't felt like a triumph. It felt like a sacrifice. Now, years later, his spirit lived in every cartridge she had made with her own hands. She loaded 5 into a magazine, slid it into the old rifle no one else wanted, serial number 15847. She had tested its action weeks ago. Rough exterior, but the barrel true. If you respected it, it would respect you. She liked that about rifles. They never lied. They simply reflected the soul of the shooter. Behind her, a voice broke the silence. "You really gonna try it?" Vera turned. Corporal Jackson from Motor Transport stood there, arms folded, curiosity in his eyes. Unlike Morrison's crew, there was no mockery in his tone, just a question. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Somebody's got a spot for you," he said. "They sure as hell won't." She considered. Trust wasn't something she gave away lightly, but his eyes were steady. And she remembered hearing whispers. His sister had been artillery, faced the same kind of quiet sabotage. Maybe that's why he was here. "All right," she said simply. He stepped up beside her, glancing at the container of rounds. His brows rose slightly. "Those aren't issue." "No," she answered, "they're mine." He gave a low whistle. "Guess they'll find out the hard way." She closed the container, locking it again. Every move measured, every gesture deliberate. She wasn't rushing. She wanted Morrison to see her calm. She wanted all of them to see it. By 1300 hours, word had already spread. Marines gathered at the range, whispering about the female lance corporal who intended to shoot the qual despite being denied proper ammo. Some expected a humiliating spectacle. Others, the younger ones, the ones who lived under Morrison's favoritism, watched with quiet hope. The firing line filled with 14 Marines from the Scout Sniper Platoon. Their optics gleamed. Their rifles were tuned. They had been handed every advantage. Vera took lane 8, furthest from Morrison's group, furthest from the laughter. She laid out her rifle, adjusted her sling, and checked the wind with practiced eyes. The mirage rippled low across the range, steady from the west. 8 miles per hour, gusting to 12, enough to humble a careless shooter. Her heartbeat slowed. She felt the gravel under her elbows, the cool metal of the rifle beneath her cheek. She whispered to herself, a habit carried from Afghanistan, "Control what you can, accept what you can't, and never, never pull the trigger until it feels right." Staff Sergeant Morrison's voice cut across the loudspeaker. Too professional now because Colonel Mitchell had arrived. "Shooters to the line. Prepare for first string, 600 yards, prone, supported. 10 rounds, 10 minutes." She loaded her hand-loaded rounds. Each click of the bolt was a promise. Jackson knelt behind her with the spotting scope. "I've got you," he said. Her finger rested on the trigger. She exhaled. The mirage shifted, signaling a lull between gusts. She fired. The round cracked through the air, straight and sure. Jackson's voice came low. "Impact, center black." She chambered the next, fired again, and again. Her rhythm was steady, measured, patient, not a single round wasted. When the 10th shot echoed downrange, silence stretched across the line. The range officer called her score first. 10 rounds, all solid in the black. Even Colonel Mitchell looked through the scope himself, his brow furrowed. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head toward Morrison. And for the first time all day, Morrison had nothing to say. But this was just the beginning. Because what Vera hadn't told them, what none of them knew yet, was that she was only warming up. Why were their groups falling apart, while hers only grew tighter? By the time the shooters shifted to the 800-yard line, a quiet unease rippled down the firing line. Marines who had laughed at her that morning now stared at their own targets, adjusting optics, second-guessing their holds. The wind had picked up, biting harder across the range. Standard ball ammunition struggled at this distance, scattering in tall, ugly strings that exposed even the best fundamentals. But Vera's shots, they sang. Each one broke with a subtle breath, a small squeeze, a pause that seemed almost like prayer. And each one landed where it needed to. "Another impact," Jackson whispered, calling the correction softly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The colonel's presence behind them, silent but sharp, spoke louder than any cheer. Vera didn't smile, didn't look up. She didn't shoot to humiliate. She shot to prove something deeper, to herself, to her grandfather, to the idea that discipline was stronger than bias. Still she felt their eyes, Morrison's burning with concealed anger, Daniel's shaking his head like this had to be luck, others whispering disbelief under their breath. She blocked it out. She had learned in Afghanistan how to ignore the noise. On an overwatch position outside Sangin, she had once sat for 12 hours in the dust while a lieutenant insisted she rotate out, claiming he couldn't trust a woman to cover his squad's withdrawal. The squad had survived because she stayed. The lieutenant had never apologized, but she remembered the look in his eyes when the rounds impacted exactly where they needed to. A look like the one Morrison wore now, equal parts denial and fear. By the third string, sweat collected at her temples. The sun had burned away the fog, leaving the California hills bare under the light. Her sling bit into her arm, cutting circulation, but she didn't loosen it. Pain meant consistency. Consistency meant truth. Jackson called another hit. He sounded almost reverent now. Dead center, you've got them, Kaz. She kept her eyes on the reticle. Don't jinx it. Not jinx, just fact. She didn't answer. She was listening to something else, the faint whisper of her grandfather's Polish-accented English in memory. Precision is a language, Vera. If you speak it fluently, the world has to listen, even if it doesn't want to. The string ended. The range officer's voice carried. Shooter lane 8 clean. A murmur spread among the Marines. Someone cursed under their breath. Someone else let out a low whistle. Morrison's jaw worked, his teeth clenching. He barked orders down the line, trying to distract from the quiet storm forming at lane 8, but nothing he said could erase what everyone had just seen. Vera sat up, rolling her shoulders, shaking out her numb arm. Her breathing was steady, but inside, the old wounds pressed against her ribs. She didn't want to feel proud. Pride was dangerous. Pride could slip into arrogance, and arrogance killed Marines in the field. But she couldn't deny the flicker inside her, the flicker of relief, of vindication. Still, she reminded herself, this wasn't finished. The real test would come at 900. As the shooters prepped for the final stage, Colonel Mitchell stepped closer. His boots crunched the gravel, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't speak at first. He just studied her rifle, her position, the tight grouping marked on her scorecard. Finally, he asked quietly, "Why isn't this Marine on my competition team?" The words weren't directed at her. They were aimed at Morrison. Morrison cleared his throat, eyes darting. "Sir, she's newly assigned. Still pending advanced marksmanship training. Mitchell cut him off with a glance sharp enough to slice steel. Then he looked at Vera directly. "Where'd you transfer from, Lance Corporal?" Vera swallowed once, keeping her voice even. "Quantico, sir, Marine Corps shooting team." The colonel's brow lifted slightly. "And your record?" She hesitated. Her service file was thin by design, classified deployments, buried commendations. She didn't want to speak of Afghanistan, didn't want to open those scars, so she offered only enough truth to cover the silence. "I competed at Camp Perry, sir. Service Rifle Championship." Mitchell's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer, as if weighing her words. Then he gave the smallest nod and stepped back, leaving Morrison stiff as a post. The next relay was called. "Lane 8 ready." Vera's cheek touched the stock again, the world shrinking down to reticle and target, wind and breath. But something felt different now. The silence behind her wasn't mocking anymore. It was watchful, heavy. She could feel their doubt cracking, their certainty collapsing under the weight of her precision. She had wanted to disappear into her work. Instead, she was being seen. And that was more terrifying than being ignored. The wind shifted, 10 o'clock to 2, erratic, tricky. She read the mirage patterns carefully, timing her shots with the invisible rhythm only she seemed to hear. Her grandfather had drilled her on this exact condition back in Montana. She remembered him holding her shoulder steady, saying, "Don't fight the wind, dance with it." Shot after shot, she danced. Jackson called each one, his voice growing sharper, more urgent. Impact, another impact, Kaz, you're walking them into disbelief. But on the last round, something happened. The gusts doubled, sudden, violent. She held her aim, adjusted, trusted her instincts, squeezed, fired. The bullet cut wide, just outside the black. Jackson cursed softly, 9 out of 10. The range officer confirmed the score, still better than anyone else on the line, but Vera felt it like a knife. That one stray shot burned deeper than all the clean ones combined. She lowered her rifle, jaw tight. That wasn't supposed to happen. She had read it. She had timed it. But the wind had laughed at her anyway. Morrison seized on it instantly. "Even a broken clock gets lucky," he muttered, just loud enough. Her hands flexed against the rifle. She wanted to look at him, wanted to speak, but she didn't. She remembered her grandfather again. Dignity doesn't argue, it simply acts. She stood, slinging the rifle over her shoulder, her face unreadable. Colonel Mitchell turned to the range officer. "Full results by this evening. Lane 8's score verified." His voice carried finality. Then he looked once more at Morrison. "We'll talk." The Marines were dismissed, their chatter low, uncertain. Some avoided her gaze. Others, quiet, unspoken, looked at her with something closer to respect. Jackson walked beside her as she left the line. "You know they'll never forget this." She didn't answer. Her mind was still on that single stray round, still on the truth it revealed. No matter how perfect, she would always be human, always vulnerable. But maybe that was the point. Why did she always walk away when the crowd leaned closer? The other Marines lingered at the range long after qualification ended, buzzing with gossip about what they had seen. Some dismissed it as luck. Others whispered about Quantico, trying to connect her to names they had heard in competition circuits. But when Jackson tried to hand her a bottle of water, she shook her head and slipped away. She preferred silence. Her boots carried her across the gravel lot, away from the laughter, away from Morrison's clenched jaw, away from the colonel's unreadable stare. Each step echoed a familiar truth. Recognition was never the reward she wanted. Recognition was dangerous. It drew eyes to places she wanted kept in shadow. She loaded her rifle into the truck bed, the metal clinking softly, and sat for a long while before even turning the key. The smell of oil and brass still clung to her hands. She flexed her fingers against the steering wheel, steady but restless. 9 out of 10. That stray shot gnawed at her. It wasn't about the scorecard, it was about control. In her mind, she replayed the wind shift 100 times, trying to catch the exact second she should have waited. Her grandfather used to say a stray round wasn't failure. It was a lesson whispered too softly the first time. But she didn't want lessons. Not anymore. She wanted quiet. The hum of the bass faded behind her as she drove toward the barracks. The sun was dropping low, throwing long shadows across the hills, and with the shadows came memory. She hadn't told them. Not Morrison, not Jackson, not anyone in 1st Battalion. She hadn't told them about Afghanistan, about Helmand, about the 4 months in the mountains where her name never appeared in official reports, where her presence was a rumor scrubbed from paperwork. The memory hit hard, the way it always did when she was alone. A steep ridge, the air thin, brittle, dust biting her throat every time she swallowed, her borrowed rifle heavier than it should have been, the paint chipped, the sling too short for her frame. She had been attached to the MARSOC team after their shooter went down. Temporary, they said, just until someone else rotated in. But temporary stretched into weeks and weeks into months. She could still hear the squad sergeant's voice in her ear that first day. "You sure you can handle this?" She hadn't answered with words. She had shouldered the rifle, adjusted for wind, and put the first shot exactly where it needed to be, covering their movement across a narrow valley. After that, he never asked again. But others did. Always. The worst day came after an ambush in a village cut into the rocks. The team had been pinned, insurgents flanking through alleys like shadows. She had taken the overwatch position, heart pounding as tracers arced back and forth. She remembered the lieutenant, a new one, eager, scared. He had crawled up to her post, sweat streaking the dust on his face. "Switch out," he ordered. "I need someone I can rely on." She had frozen for half a second, disbelief burning through her chest. The team below was fighting for their lives, and this officer, this man who had never seen her shoot, was telling her to step aside. "No," she said. He grabbed her arm, tried to pull her back. She shoved him off hard and pressed her cheek back to the stock. Her hands didn't shake. She took the shot, then another, and another, covering the squad's withdrawal through the choke point. Later, when the dust cleared and the village fell silent, no one spoke about the moment. The lieutenant never mentioned it in the report. The sergeant thanked her once, low and private. But when the after-action paperwork reached Kandahar, her name wasn't there. Just support personnel attached. No one had ever said the word, but she knew what it meant. Invisible. Erased. Easier than admitting a female Marine had held the line when a man had faltered. She didn't tell anyone back home. Not her unit. Not Quantico. Not even Jackson now, though he had stood beside her today when no one else would. Her secrets lived in silence. The truck slowed at a red light inside the base perimeter. She drummed her fingers against the wheel, eyes unfocused. A group of Marines jogged past in PT gear, laughing, carefree. She envied them. Envied the lightness they carried, the way their service seemed unburdened by shadows. Her own service was different. Each step forward came with ghosts. Her grandfather, Afghanistan, the lieutenant's hand on her arm, the unmarked reports. Sometimes she wondered if Morrison's laughter was easier. At least open cruelty gave you something solid to push against. Silence was harder. It left you hollow, always questioning your worth. She parked by the barracks, cut the engine, and sat for another long moment. Her phone buzzed with a message, Jackson checking in. "You good?" She stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then she locked it again without replying. He meant well, but she didn't want comfort. She wanted distance. Comfort felt like weakness. That night she cleaned her rifle alone in her room. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The bore brush scraped, the rag darkened with oil. The ritual calmed her. She worked each part with precision, the way her grandfather taught her. No shortcuts, no rushing. By the time the rifle gleamed again, the base outside had fallen silent. She sat back on her bunk, staring at the weapon laid across her knees. The number etched into its side, 15,847, caught the light. The unwanted rifle, the backup, the forgotten tool that no one cared about until it spoke the truth in her hands. She traced the digits with her fingertip, her chest heavy. Maybe that was why she liked it. It was her reflection. Unwanted, overlooked, but precise. Her eyes closed, exhaustion pressing down. In the quiet, her grandfather's voice came again, softer this time, almost like a prayer. "Sometimes, Vera, the world doesn't need you to shout. Sometimes it only needs you to wait and then speak once, so clearly they cannot ignore you." She exhaled slowly, clutching that memory like a lifeline. But deep inside, a darker truth lingered. She could never tell them about Helmand, about the classified nights when she counted bodies through a scope under starlight, about the things she had done, the things that haunted her still. No, they didn't know the real reason she stayed silent. They didn't know what she carried. And if they did, she wasn't sure they'd see her as a Marine at all. Why was his laughter gone now, replaced by whispers behind closed doors? The morning after the qualification, the air inside the armory was thick, heavy with unspoken tension. Morrison's voice no longer carried that smug confidence. It was lower now, clipped, when he barked orders to his corporals. But every time Vera walked past the cage to check her equipment, she felt his stare burn into her back. He hadn't forgotten, he wouldn't forgive. Men like Morrison never lost quietly. By noon, the rumors had already started. Whispers in the chow hall about her cheating, about hand-loaded rounds, about how she had bent the rules. Some said she had hidden training no one knew about, that her record wasn't what it seemed. Others suggested favors, strings pulled behind the scenes. No one ever said the word female out loud anymore, but she could hear it in the pauses, in the way their voices dipped when she walked into a room. Jackson slid into the seat across from her in the mess that day, tray clattering onto the table. "You hear it yet?" She didn't look up. She just poked at the lukewarm pasta on her tray. "They're saying you cheated, saying you snuck ammo in." Her fork stilled. Slowly she lifted her eyes. "You believe that?" He smirked. "Hell no, I spotted for you, remember. That was skill, not luck. But Morrison, he's got half the platoon repeating his gospel." Vera sighed, setting the fork down. "Doesn't matter what they say." Jackson leaned forward. "It does. Rumors stick, especially when someone like Morrison fans the fire." She met his eyes steady, then let him burn. But when she walked out of the mess, alone again, the words didn't feel as strong as she wanted them to. That afternoon, she was summoned to the admin office. A stack of forms awaited her: equipment requests, range reports, maintenance records, all stamped with red corrections. Half the documents she had filed last week now bore notes in Morrison's handwriting. Improper formatting, missing signatures, resubmit through chain of command. Paperwork games, the oldest weapon in the system. She stared at the pile for a long moment, jaw tight, before taking the seat. If Morrison wanted to drown her in ink and bureaucracy, she'd play along. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Hours later, as the fluorescent lights flickered and the office emptied, she was still there, rewriting forms, signing and resigning, her hand cramping. Each correction was petty, deliberate. Each rejection calculated to remind her of her place. When she finally finished, she stacked the papers neatly and exhaled, rubbing her temples. The silence pressed against her. She almost wished for the sound of her grandfather's voice, some memory to guide her through this grind. But all she heard was the hum of the air vent and her own tired heartbeat. She packed up, walking out into the cool night air. Stars stretched wide above Camp Pendleton, brilliant and sharp, just like the ones she used to watch in Afghanistan from overwatch positions. The memory came uninvited, lying prone under a foreign sky, dust stinging her face, eyes glued to the reticle for hours. The silence of the mountains had been heavy too, but it was different from this. That silence carried danger. This silence carried doubt. She hated that doubt more. The next day, Morrison escalated. During a weapons inspection, he made a point of questioning her rifle, serial 15,847, right in front of the platoon. "This old thing," he said, lifting it for all to see. "Not regulation for precision qual, shouldn't have even been on the line." Vera kept her arms crossed, face neutral. Jackson spoke up before she could. "Sir, that rifle, been on the armory roster for years, cleared for use, you know that." Morrison's jaw tightened. He set the rifle down harder than necessary and dismissed them, but the look he gave her lingered, sharp and dark. It wasn't about the rifle, it wasn't about ammo, it was about control. Later in the barracks, Jackson leaned against her doorway. "He's coming for you harder than I thought. You need to watch your back." Vera looked up from cleaning the rifle, her rag blackened with oil. "This isn't new." "Maybe not," Jackson said, "but it's louder now." She studied him. "Why do you care?" He shrugged, but his eyes gave him away. "Because I've seen this movie before. My sister went through the same thing in artillery school. They tried to grind her down until she quit. She didn't. You won't either." Vera went back to her cleaning, the silence stretching. Finally, she said, "Quitting was never the problem. Being erased was." Jackson didn't answer. He didn't need to. The days blurred after that. Inspections, paperwork, whispers. Every small victory turned into another excuse for Morrison to tighten the screws. But beneath it all, Vera felt something else building, quiet but steady. She thought of her grandfather again, of his patience, his dignity. The way he had faced dismissal in Montana, his Polish accent marking him as an outsider. He hadn't argued. He had let his rifle speak. And eventually, the same people who mocked him lined up to buy his work. Maybe that was her path too. But late at night, when she lay awake in the barracks listening to the hum of distant generators, another memory returned, the village in Helmand. The lieutenant's hand on her arm, the shot she had taken anyway, the squad's lives depending on her silence. She remembered the weight of the rifle that night, heavier than any medal, heavier than any recognition, a weight she still carried. And she knew, with a hollow certainty, that Morrison wasn't her real battle. The real battle was with herself. Because no matter how many perfect groups she shot, no matter how many rumors she silenced, she still couldn't erase the ghosts of Afghanistan. And sometimes she wondered if maybe Morrison was right, not about her skill, not about her worth, but about something deeper. Maybe she didn't belong here. Not because she wasn't capable, but because she carried too much silence, too many truths no one wanted to hear. She closed her eyes, gripping the rifle across her chest, the cold steel pressing against her skin like an anchor. One thought whispered through her mind before sleep, finally dragged her under. What happens when dignity isn't enough? Why did the silence hurt more than the shouting ever could? 3 days after the qualification, Vera stood at the back of the morning formation, boots aligned, eyes forward. The California sun was already hot, pressing down on the gravel lot. Colonel Mitchell's inspection was scheduled for later that week, and everyone was on edge. Morrison used that edge like a weapon. He paced in front of the platoon, his voice booming. Accountability is discipline. Discipline is the difference between life and death. And some of you, his gaze cut toward Vera, seem to think you can do whatever you please. A ripple of laughter moved through the ranks, quiet, controlled, but deliberate. Her face didn't change, her shoulders didn't move, she stared straight ahead. Morrison stepped closer, stopping just a few feet from her. Some Marines think the rules don't apply to them. They think they can bring their little hobbies into my armory, onto my range, into my battalion. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Every pair of eyes knew where to look. Vera's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Morrison sneered. Out here, skill doesn't mean a damn thing without discipline. And some of you, his voice rose, sharp as a whip, don't have either. The silence afterward was suffocating. When formation broke, Jackson caught up to her. You can't just stand there and take it, he hissed under his breath. She kept walking. What do you expect me to do? Push back, file a report, call him out. She stopped then, turning to face him. Her eyes were tired but steady. And then what? You think the system will suddenly believe me, or will it bury me the same way it buried Afghanistan? Jackson opened his mouth, then shut it again. She walked on, leaving him in the dust. The rest of the day blurred into inspections, drills, pointless tasks meant to keep her busy. Morrison assigned her to inventory cleaning kits, something normally reserved for the newest privates. She didn't argue. She lined the kits, counted each brush and rod, logged each item with the same precision she gave her shooting. If he wanted to bury her in busy work, she'd let him, but she wouldn't let him see her break. That night she sat alone in her room, her rifle across her lap. The whispers from the hall carried through the thin walls. She only shot like that because she cheated. No way she's legit. Morrison says she rigged it. Yeah, wait till Mitchell finds out. She'll be gone. Vera shut her eyes. The words pressed in like smoke, choking, endless. And with them came another memory. Helmand again. The village, the lieutenant's hand, the sound of her own breath against the stock as she took the shot anyway. But this time the memory shifted. In her mind's eye she missed. She saw the bullet cut wide, the squad pinned, men falling because she hesitated. The ghost of that single stray round at the range twisted into something bigger, darker. She opened her eyes, breath sharp. Her hands trembled against the rifle for the first time in years. She forced herself to focus, disassembling it piece by piece. Bolt, barrel, stock, clean, oil, reassemble. Her grandfather's voice steadied her. Control what you can, accept what you can't. But what if she couldn't control herself anymore? The next morning, Morrison escalated again. During a weapons briefing, he called her to the front of the room. His tone was smooth now, almost pleasant, which made it worse. "Lance Corporal Kaczynski," he said, motioning her forward. "You claim to know so much about precision shooting. Why don't you explain to the platoon why your special ammunition makes such a difference?" The word special dripped with mockery. Every eye in the room turned to her, some curious, some expectant, some waiting for her to fail. Vera walked to the front, spine straight. She stared at the chart on the wall, ballistics curves, wind drift, drop rates. She could have explained it all in her sleep. She had lived it since childhood. But her throat closed, her mouth went dry. She looked at the faces staring back at her, the smirks, the skepticism, the ghosts of Helmand layered over every one of them. She thought of her grandfather again, how he had been mocked when he first arrived in Montana, his accent ridiculed, his knowledge dismissed. He had answered with rifles that spoke louder than his words ever could. She looked back at Morrison. His smirk was waiting, ready to twist her silence into proof. Her voice came low, steady, even though her heart pounded. Consistency. Ammunition is only as good as the care put into it. Care equals trust. Trust equals survival. Then she stepped back. The room was quiet. Morrison let the silence linger before chuckling. "Poetic," he said, dismissing her with a wave. "But poetry doesn't win wars." Dismissed. She walked out, the eyes of her peers heavy on her back. Jackson caught up to her again. "Why didn't you?" "Because they don't want an answer," she snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "They want a target." He fell silent, watching her storm off. That night, alone in her room, she finally let the cracks show. She sat on the edge of her bunk, rifle across her knees, staring at the floor. The weight of it all, the whispers, the paperwork, the ghosts, pressed down until her shoulders shook. Her grandfather's words echoed, but tonight they felt hollow. "Dignity doesn't argue, it simply acts." She whispered back into the silence, voice breaking. "What if acting isn't enough?" No answer came. Just the hum of the barracks. And the fear, cold and sharp, that maybe Morrison wasn't her worst enemy. Maybe it was herself. Why did the colonel call her name when everyone else expected her to vanish? 2 mornings after Morrison's public humiliation, Vera was summoned to battalion headquarters. The summons came sharp and unexpected. A sealed envelope slid under her barracks door before dawn. She sat on her bunk staring at it for long minutes before opening it. "Report to Colonel Mitchell, 900. Her chest tightened. Marines didn't just get called to the colonel's office without reason. For most, it meant punishment. For some, reassignment. For her, it could mean the end. Morrison's whispers had been spreading like wildfire. Maybe Mitchell believed them. Maybe her brief moment of triumph was already over. At 8:55, she stood outside the door, uniform pressed, hands still, face unreadable. Her heart hammered anyway. The sergeant major opened the door. "Colonel will see you now." Inside, Mitchell sat behind a heavy desk, sunlight streaming through the blinds behind him. He didn't rise, he simply gestured. "At ease, Lance Corporal, sit." She sat, posture rigid. Mitchell studied her file for a long moment before looking up. His eyes were sharp, cutting, but not unkind. "I've reviewed the range scores. Lane 8, perfect performance under difficult wind conditions. Then I reviewed your service record." Her throat went dry. Mitchell continued, tapping the folder. "Quantico, Camp Perry, a service rifle championship, but your deployment record, that's thin." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Too thin." Vera's jaw tightened. She said nothing. Mitchell leaned forward. Tell me, Lance Corporal, did you cheat? The question hit like a round to the chest. She forced her voice steady. No, sir. Then how did you do it? Her mind flickered through images of Montana summers in her grandfather's workshop, of Afghan dust, of the lieutenant's hand on her arm. She chose her words carefully. Preparation, sir, and consistency. Mitchell's brow arched. That all? She met his gaze. That's everything, sir. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Finally, Mitchell sat back. You know, Morrison had a lot to say about you. None of it flattering, but I don't judge Marines by rumors. I judge them by results. And your results speak louder than his mouth ever could. Her chest loosened just slightly. Mitchell closed the folder. Effective immediately, you're reassigned to the Marksmanship Training Unit. Assistant Instructor. Report Monday morning. You'll also receive meritorious promotion to corporal. The words rang in her ears. Promotion, instructor, recognition. But instead of relief, she felt hollow. She straightened. Permission to speak freely, sir. Mitchell nodded. Why me? Mitchell's eyes softened just a fraction. Because Marines need examples that don't fit the mold. And because I don't care what Morrison thinks. I care about precision, discipline, integrity. I see those in you, even if you don't see them in yourself. Her throat closed. She managed a nod. Aye, sir. Dismissed, she walked out into the bright sunlight, the world suddenly sharper. Jackson was waiting near the steps, leaning against the wall like he'd been there for hours. Well, he asked. She exhaled slowly. Promotion Training Unit, Monday. A grin spread across his face. About damn time. But Vera didn't smile. She looked out across the parade deck, her mind still heavy. Recognition wasn't what she wanted. Recognition had cost her before. That night she packed her gear quietly. The barracks hummed with the usual noise, laughter, video games, low conversations. No one stopped to congratulate her. No one mentioned her promotion. Morrison's shadow still lingered too large. But Jackson found her before lights out, leaning in her doorway again. So, Corporal Kaczynski, how's it feel? She shrugged. The same. Bull, he smirked. You're just not letting yourself enjoy it. She set her bag down. Because it's not over, promotions don't erase rumors. His smirk faded. No, but they prove something. They prove Mitchell, not buying Morrison's garbage. That's a start. She didn't reply. The weekend passed in silence. She walked the base alone, boots crunching against the pavement, watching Marines train on obstacle courses, drill on the parade deck. She thought of her grandfather again, how he had never wanted applause for his rifles, only precision. How he believed dignity wasn't in recognition, but in doing the work no one else wanted to do. Maybe that's what this was. Not a reward, not redemption, just work. On Monday morning, she reported to the Marksmanship Training Unit. The classroom smelled of gun, oil, and dust. 24 Marines sat waiting, 3 of them women. Nervous, unsure. Faces she recognized from her own early days, the same doubt, the same fear of not belonging. The instructor in charge introduced her simply, Corporal Kaczynski, Assistant Instructor. Pay attention to her. She knows more about ballistics than most of us ever will. Vera stood at the front, her hands steady, her face calm. But inside, her chest ached. She thought of Helmand again, of the silence in those after-action reports, of the lieutenant's hand on her arm. She thought of the ghosts she still carried. She looked at the Marines in front of her, young, hungry, waiting. And for the first time in years, she spoke more than a few sentences at once. My grandfather taught me to load ammunition when I was 12. He told me the secret wasn't power. It was patience, consistency, care. That's what makes a round hit true. That's what makes a Marine hit true. Not the badge, not the bragging, just the work. The room was silent, eyes fixed on her. She exhaled. You'll hear people tell you that you don't belong, that you can't do it. That's noise. Ignore it. What matters is what you put on target. What matters is what you prove to yourself. Every shot you fire is your answer. Let the shot speak, not you. A quiet strength filled the room. Heads nodded, doubt eased. And Vera felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not pride, not vindication, something softer, something steadier. Hoping. But when the class dismissed and the room emptied, she stayed behind, staring at the rifle laid across the instructor's desk. The same serial number, 15,847. Someone had scratched into the inside of the stock, Kaczynski's rifle. Her breath caught. For a moment, she felt her grandfather's presence so sharply she almost turned, expecting to see him there. But there was only silence. And for once, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like belonging. Why did the young Marines watch her with eyes that seemed to ask for more than just instruction? 2 weeks into her new role, Vera stood before another classroom of trainees. The rifles leaned in their racks, the smell of oil and gunpowder faint in the air. Charts lined the walls, wind drift, elevation adjustments, trajectories under different temperatures. But what held the room wasn't the math. It was her presence. When she spoke, her voice was low, steady. Not the booming command of other instructors, not the clipped bark of authority. Hers was different, quiet, intentional. The kind of voice that made people lean forward without realizing it. She drew a line on the board, the arc of a bullet across distance. Every round you fire is more than brass and powder. It's a question, and the target answers truthfully every time. You can't cheat physics. You can't bluff consistency. Either you respect the process or you get exposed. Some of the Marines nodded, scribbling notes. But she noticed one woman near the back, Private First Class Nguyen, sitting stiff, her jaw tight, not writing anything. After class, Vera approached her quietly. "You didn't take notes." Nguyen's shoulders stiffened. I didn't think it would matter." Vera tilted her head. "Why not?" Nguyen's eyes flickered down. "Because people already think I don't belong here. Doesn't matter if I learn it or not. I'll wash out like the others." Vera's chest tightened. She saw herself in that hesitation, that fragile crack of doubt. She set a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Listen to me. They told me the same thing for years, and maybe they'll keep saying it, but the rifle doesn't care who you are. It only answers the question you ask it. That's the truth you hold on to. No one can take that from you." Nguyen's eyes lifted slowly, searching hers. Vera didn't smile. She didn't need to. The steadiness in her voice was enough. Later, as the trainees filed out, Jackson leaned against the doorway. "You're good at this," he said. She arched a brow. "At what?" "At making them believe they can do it. You think you're just teaching ballistics, but it's more than that." Vera shook her head. "I'm not here to inspire. I'm here to make sure they can survive." Jackson smirked. "Sometimes those are the same thing." But even as she found her footing in the training unit, the shadows of Morrison's influence hadn't vanished. He wasn't in her daily orbit anymore, but his voice still slithered through the ranks. He filed complaints about her unauthorized ammunition. He hinted at favoritism in her promotion. He spread doubts like poison, careful never to be caught outright. Then came the inspection. Colonel Mitchell convened a full audit of the armory after discrepancies surfaced in Morrison's logs. Boxes of ammunition unaccounted for, favoritism in allocations, requisitions marked as filled but never delivered. When the investigators arrived, Morrison's confidence cracked. He barked louder, his jaw clenched tighter, but the edge in his voice was no longer control, it was fear. Vera watched from a distance, saying nothing. She didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. She just observed, quiet as always, knowing the system had finally turned its eyes where they belonged. But even then, Morrison tried one last play. One evening, as she left the training range, he was waiting by her truck. The sun was setting, the sky painted orange and crimson. He stepped out of the shadows, blocking her path. "You think this is over?" he hissed. Vera's hand brushed the truck's handle, but she didn't open it. She faced him squarely, eyes calm. "It already is." His lip curled. "You embarrassed me. You humiliated my platoon. You think you're better than me." Her voice stayed level. "I don't think about you at all." That landed harder than any insult. His face flushed. For a moment she thought he might step closer, cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But footsteps echoed from the lot, Jackson approaching. Morrison froze, then spat on the ground and walked off. Jackson frowned as he reached her. What was that about? Vera exhaled slowly, the last thrash of a dying snake. And she was right. 2 weeks later, Morrison was gone, transferred to San Diego, reassigned to run inventory at the recruit depot. Word spread quickly. No one said exactly why, but everyone knew. For the first time in years, Vera felt the pressure in her chest ease. Not gone, not erased, but lighter. She threw herself into her new role, shaping the next generation of shooters. Nguyen began to rise, her groups tightening week by week. Other Marines, men and women alike, found themselves listening to Vera in ways they hadn't expected. She wasn't loud. She wasn't showy. But her steadiness demanded respect. One afternoon, after a long day on the range, Nguyen approached her. "Corporal Kaczynski, why don't you ever brag about your scores, about your deployment, about anything?" Vera paused, adjusting the sling on her rifle. She thought of Afghanistan, of the erased reports of the ghosts she still carried. She thought of her grandfather, of rifles that spoke louder than any words. Finally, she said quietly, "Because the people who brag the loudest usually have the least to say." Nguyen frowned. "Then what about you? You've got plenty to say." Vera met her eyes steady. "Then I'll let the rifle say it." Nguyen nodded slowly, understanding dawning. That night Vera sat alone in her quarters, staring at the old rifle, 15,847. The scratches inside the stock, Kaczynski's rifle, caught the light again. She ran her fingers over them, feeling the weight of what it meant. Not just her story, but something bigger, something carried forward. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a choice. And that choice, that dignity, was hers alone. Why did the room fall silent when her name was announced? 6 months after her reassignment, Vera stood on the edge of the training range, the California sun burning down, the ocean breeze carrying faint salt into the air. A crowd had gathered, officers, trainees, instructors, even a few from her old unit. Word had spread about her methods, about her scores, about her refusal to bend to the noise. Colonel Mitchell had ordered a demonstration. "Let them see it for themselves," he'd said. The targets stretched out across the valley, steel silhouettes gleaming in the distance. 600, 800, 900, 1,000. The kind of distances that separated real shooters from the pretenders. She adjusted the sling on her arm, the rifle resting against her shoulder. 15,847. The same rifle no one else wanted. The one that had carried her from humiliation to recognition. The one that now bore her name carved inside the stock. The trainees watched, wide-eyed. Among them, Nguyen stood tall, no longer the hesitant private she had been months ago. Confidence marked her posture now. She had started believing. Jackson stood behind the spotting scope, nodding once at her. "You ready?" Vera didn't answer, she simply breathed. The range officer called out, "Shooter ready, fire when ready." The world shrank, wind, mirage, distance, time. She broke the first shot. The steel at 600 rang with a sharp clang. Jackson's voice followed. Impact. The second, 800, another ring. Her cheek pressed deeper into the stock. Her breathing slowed, steady. 900, the hardest. She timed the wind shift, exhaled, squeezed. The steel shuddered. Impact. The crowd murmured, low and awed. Then came the 1,000. The air shimmered, mirage swirling. The kind of shot that demanded not just skill, but trust, trust in herself, in the rifle, in the patience her grandfather had drilled into her since childhood. She closed her eyes for half a second, hearing his voice again. Consistency, Vera, patience, dignity. Her eyes opened. She aligned the reticle, held the breath, squeezed. The crack echoed across the valley, a half-second delay, then clang! The steel at 1,000 quivered. Jackson grinned, shaking his head, clean. The crowd erupted, some clapping, some stunned into silence. Colonel Mitchell gave the smallest nod, arms folded, his approval clear. But Vera didn't smile, didn't raise her fist, didn't bask in their reaction. She simply cleared the rifle, laid it down with care, and stepped back. Because for her, the victory wasn't in the shot. It was in the silence afterward, the silence she had chosen. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Nguyen approached her. Her eyes were bright, steady. "Corporal Kaczynski, how do you stay so calm, even when everyone doubts you?" Vera looked at her for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Because calm isn't what they give you, it's what you take back. Every time you line up a shot, you take back control. That's how you survive, that's how you win." Nguyen nodded, her jaw set with new determination. As night fell, Vera sat alone in her quarters, the rifle laid across her lap once more. She traced the scratches inside the stock, feeling the grooves with her fingertips. She thought of her grandfather in Montana, the smell of oil and wood. She thought of Afghanistan, of the ghosts that would never fully leave. She thought of Morrison, gone but not forgotten, his cruelty dissolved into irrelevance. And she thought of Nguyen and the others like her, watching, waiting, needing proof that silence could be strength. Her chest ached, but it wasn't the ache of doubt this time. It was the ache of knowing her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was theirs too. The hum of the bass at night carried through the window, generators, distant voices, the rhythm of marine life. She closed her eyes and breathed. Dignity doesn't argue, it doesn't shout, it simply acts. And sometimes, acting meant more than hitting a 1,000-yard target. Sometimes it meant carrying ghosts so others wouldn't have to. Sometimes it meant standing alone, so others could finally stand with you. She leaned the rifle against the wall, switched off the light, and lay back on her bunk. The silence was complete. And for the first time, she welcomed it. Because she understood now. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.